Holy smokes, it's Friday already. Christmas is almost here. There's only 2 days left during the week of awesome here. We're going to kick the weekend off with our conversation with Patrick from Tracks of the Damned right here on awesomepodcast.com.
Awesome. Just tell people they're awesome and mean it.
Awesome.
Awesome. Awesome.
Did you have an awesome time? Did you drink awesome shooters and listen to awesome music and then just sit around and soak up each other's awesomeness?
Awesome. 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 That was awesome.
You guys are awesome.
No, you're awesome.
No, you are awesome.
Sir, you are awesome. Seriously.
Awesome. Awesome. Awesome.
Everything is awesome.
Welcome to this week's edition of Everything is Awesome. I am your host, Kev, and this is the show where we sit down and talk to awesome people about awesome things. This week's guest, I'm the only thing I'm disappointed in is that I didn't get to him sooner because it would have been a perfect bonus Monday episode for Halloween this past week or so ago. Well, actually, by the time this airs, probably a couple weeks ago. But regardless, finding this podcast was like, oh my god, this is like my Halloween. This is my month of October, where I like to sit around and watch movies, Halloween movies, or horror movies in general, every single day, and like just talk about them and write about them and whatnot. And when I found this podcast, like it was right around when the Scream episode started to drop. And after listening to, that's where I started. I listened to the first Scream one, and after listening to our guest this week talk about Scream, I instantly knew we were going to have a great conversation because very much it sounds like our guest this week. If you've listened to me and Gary, our very first guest on this podcast, talk, the Scream movie, specifically the first one, was kind of not necessarily my entry point into horror, but it was when I was in my formative years of movies and whatnot, and Scream means the world to me. I am not as well educated when I talk about it, or I don't sound like it as our guest this week, but let's kick right to it. From Tracks of the Damned, the host, Patrick. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Yes, you're quite welcome. I love horror movies, and it all started actually because of one year at Christmas. I was watching some terrible B Christmas movies, and I was like, obviously this is what horror movies are like, and they were all like horror themed. Like I think it was like this Bill Goldberg Christmas movie,
Santa's Sleigh.
Yes.
It's pretty good.
Yes, it was. And yeah, I mean, I say horrible B movies, but I love them dearly.
Oh yeah.
And it started with that and Hulk Hogan's Santa with Muscles.
Okay, I haven't seen that one.
It's not, that one's probably more out of your realm as far as like, it's not horror.
I think there's an intersection there though. I think there is a muscly Santa subgenre that has to, like, at some point someone thought, oh, it's a funny comedy, but also I think that person secretly like had a muscly Santa fetish. Like it seems like too specific an image for someone to just keep happening over and over again. I think if we were to search Reddit, we would find a subreddit about like great muscly Santa pics and like close-ups of like red velvet and like biceps bulging out of it.
In 2016, I'm not surprised that like what isn't a fetish at this point,
Yeah. I mean, and God bless those people, Like I'm glad that they have Santa's sleigh and Santa with muscles.
Yeah, I remember I think it was Christmas Day. I ended up watching Santa's. It was before I had kids, and I think I was single at the time. So like, I went to my parents' house for Christmas, and before I took my nap, after breakfast and doing gifts and whatnot, I went on demand. And I saw Hulk Hogan, Santa with Muscles. I'm watching this, and it was just it was such a joy to watch the incredible train wreck that movie was. But that, I was like, you know what, this to me is like what October's about. Like I should be watching horror movies, and I have yet to have a successful year of watching 31 Halloween or horror movies since I started this probably about 2 or 3 years ago. But it's I love horror movies, and it sounds like I'm gonna guess based off of listening to your Scream commentary and specifically the beginning of it, you're probably in your like late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm 28.
It's okay, yeah. So I'm 32. I consider, even though I lived most, more 80s than I didn't, I still consider myself a child of the 90s because that's when like I knew, like that's what I was like able to remember. Like I don't remember anything from the 80s.
Right.
So, except for maybe like I think like I guess Turtles technically was late 80s and Back to the Future, but I don't know if I necessarily remember it from the 80s. I just remember it because I watched it all the time when I was a kid in the 90s.
Yeah, there's some bleed over when it comes to cultural artifacts, especially if it's like, oh, we have this E.T. video cassette, but I didn't watch it until 1991. But to me, that was just like what my childhood was. So
yeah, and I mean. You're like, especially with the Scream movies and horror movies in general, that's not something you're necessarily watching as a kid. You're more of a teenager, and that is truly like for me the like late 90s. Is when I started watching those type of films, and Scream was right around there. Like it was what, like 98?
96.
96. Okay. So I was 12 years old. I probably honestly watched that right around, not in theater, but probably when it came out on VHS or DVD, whatever was out back then. And listening to you, not only intro that episode for Scream, but listening to, I was listening to it the other day. I didn't finish it because I fell asleep watching the movie. Because it was like 11 o'clock at night.
Sure, and that's a long for a horror movie. That's a long movie.
Yeah, and I never noticed how long it was until you pointed it out. Like, it's never ever clicked. And
I
honestly,
never noticed how long they were until I decided I was going to do all of them. And my show is a commentary track podcast, so I do commentary tracks for horror movies. So like film length is really important because when you are doing a commentary track, you run out of things to say real quick, and then so like. The previous longest movie I had done was like about 100 minutes, and those movies are all close to 2 hours.
And I honestly, like, I enjoy every single one of those movies. Obviously, they get a little campy.
Oh, yeah.
But sticking with the first one, like, listening to you talk about it, and I'm sure, like, when I go back and listen to your archives, and because that's the guy I usually am. I usually find either in episode 1 I need to start at, or because like you're not doing something that's necessarily episodic in storytelling. I find in interview shows or in a commentary track, like I find something I just really want to listen to, and
Absolutely,
like Scream jumped up at me right away. So listening to how you not only break it down before you start the movie, but break it down while you're commentating throughout the movie, it like me, I'd be like, that movie good. Like I would be such like I would sound like an uneducated asshole. I would sound like a super fan. Whereas you like break it down like very like you're a teacher almost. Like you're breaking it down. So let's start with like your origins when it comes to the horror movie or movies in general. Like, is that something you've had an interest in your whole life? About?
I mean, as far as horror movie goes, it's kind of close to your story. Like, Scream was the first one. Like, we were at some timeshare in the middle of Texas. It was my family and my older sister went to the counter, and they let you rent out a VCR and they let you rent out videotapes, and they let us rent Scream, and we didn't tell our parents we were watching Scream, so we were just like, we're gonna be watching a movie in the other room, and God knows what my parents were doing during that time, but like we were in the room, we're like shh. And then my sister is 4 years older than me. She goes, "You're not going to be too scared, right?" And I go, No, I'll be okay. And of course, I was terrified. So that was like, but I mean, also, in video stores, in Houston, we had a video store that was connected to a grocery store. And my mom, she wouldn't want, like, she'd be going grocery shopping and she would take me along and she would go, "Oh, do you want to just like wait in the video store for me?" So I'm not bothering her and like bring her 100 boxes of cereal and shit. So like, I'd wander the video store, and the aisle with the most interesting boxes and the most interesting pictures on the back of the boxes was horror. So even like at a young age, I was just sort of like just drawn to these images of Freddy Krueger and like imagining like, what the hell is this movie, but yeah, and then as far as film, it's just been sort of a long developing thing. I'm also a huge comedy fan, and I saw Duck Soup, the Marx Brothers movie.
Okay.
And it was on AFI, did like 100 funniest movies special, and I saw a clip of that, and I was like, oh wow, that looks good. And I watched a whole bunch of those AFI 100 Funniest Movies, and it sort of like reminded me, or it didn't remind me, it like planted the idea in my head. Oh, you can like, even though I'm a kid, like I can like old movies. You know, Duck Soup's 1932. You know, like I can like movies that my parents consider old. There's still something I could like about them. So like from then on, I just sort of like, all right, well, what else is there to do? And then I saw Annie Hall, the Woody Allen film, and that is like an encyclopedia of film techniques. He sort of uses every technique you can in the book, but he uses it all for jokes. So it really translated for me, because I was 12 or whatever. But I know what a one-liner is, and I knew what a good joke was, and there was a ton of good jokes in that movie. So, and then from then on, I was sort of interested in film.
Yeah, it's for me, like, because my interest in film, was always just as a fan. Like, it sounds, because again, I think that would be the difference in our commentary is that you break it down as almost like is this something you do like outside of the podcast? Are you either like working towards something with film, or is this just the podcast that is what you do film stuff for?
I mean, as far as like that sort of thing, you just get there eventually once you've watched a lot of movies, and like most of my friends that I have are people who watch a lot of movies and are into movies. So most of the discussions I end up having are about movies. And I mean, I'm not a film critic. I'm not working towards that. I'm not writing a book or anything. I had a podcast before Tracks of the Dam called Directors Club. And that was a film podcast where we sort of watched different directors' films every episode and would discuss that director. And that ended up being like a film school for me, because there was a lot of films that I hadn't seen, particularly like foreign films and older films. And then suddenly, I had 2 weeks to become an expert on Pedro Almodovar. I had 2 weeks to become an expert on Samuel Fuller. And because it's a podcast, like, you better have something to say other than I like that movie, or else it's not interesting. So that sort of developed the way I process movies now. Is they go in, they go in through my eyes and ears, and then the way they enter my brain is through like thinking critically about them, as opposed to just sort of passively enjoying them.
And that's like something that I listened to, like, that I was like, holy crap. And I don't know if, like, I'm hoping that it's for your sake, that it's not like for the 4 movies of Scream that you had to do this for each episode, but I'm sure it's for each franchise at least. You did something that's like 15 hours of prep to record your Scream commentary.
Yeah, the good thing is the good and bad thing is there's a lot of preparation overlap, which is there's a documentary about the making of the first film, but there's also a documentary that covers the rest of the sequels. And there's a good book called Down and Dirty Pictures, which is about about sort of the rise of the independent film throughout the 90s. So it covers Miramax, covers Kevin Smith's films, covers Tarantino, all that sort of thing. And, Scream was made by Dimension, which is a studio offshoot of Miramax. So it had the making of that. And basically, again, once you have 2 hours to fill with your voice, and I talk kind of fast, like, you better have a lot of info. So I over-prepared, and I definitely didn't do 15 for each movie, but I would say it tapered off. But that first Scream, especially Scream 1's really important to me, so I want that commentary to be really good. Yeah. And I have chosen a podcasting form where I have to put a lot of effort in order to produce something good. Like, the nice thing about podcast is, generally speaking, you can just sort of like let whatever happens happen and people enjoy it. But I guess I like making things hard on myself, so I choose the one that requires all of the research. But by the time I got to like Scream 4, I'd say my like preparation was down to like 6 hours.
Which is still an insane amount of time. Like, for me, at most, preparation for me is now with your podcast, would have ended up being about 6 hours if I truly did my full preparation, which I never do. This show I like to attack, and my listeners know, with basically little to no knowledge about my guests, so that it's just an honest conversation.
Right.
But with fellow podcasters, I'd like to listen to, anywhere from 1 to 3 episodes of their podcast. So I usually put in at most 3 to 6 hours.
Yeah, that's how much I listen. I listen to 3 episodes of your podcast. So
Yeah, it's actually like an unwritten rule that I read somewhere. It's like you do about 3 episodes to get to know the person that you're either going to be a guest on or who you're going to have on as a guest.
You recommended an episode I listened to, so I listened to that. I listened to the most recent, and then I just chose another one that seemed interesting.
Yeah, and that's, I just got into the idea of like recommending ones because I guess I read it somewhere. I was like, yeah, and like that one is just in particular because it's like the most famous. And I don't like to use that term because my show is not about talking to famous people. It's talking about interesting, awesome people.
Right.
But like, so the proper word is someone who I admire. Like Aaron McGathy is someone who I just truly admire. Like in the world of like, where Scream is like your movie for horror, and same with me, but like my passion is podcasting to a fault. And so I have like 3 podcasters that I just truly admire, and to get Aaron McGathy on as one of them, it was just like, holy crap, like I'm dying. Someone's making I'm a Make-A-Wish kid right now. And it was just really cool to sit down and talk to her. And I don't know, for me, I think what makes that episode so great is that before we connected, anyone that hasn't listened to that episode yet, I hit record before we connected. And with very little editing, the pre-intro to that show is basically me being a nervous little teenager, and like having a pep talk. And I think that's what makes that episode so great, in my opinion, is that I just give like both sides of the, like, here's me being nervous. I hit record with McGathy and let's go.
Yeah. You find even within the format of an interview show, you found an arc.
Yeah. And so that's one of my favorites, and I always, until I get Kevin Smith on, that will probably always be the show that I recommend, because it's just I think it's just a very honest interview to both like who I am as an interviewer and I guess, I don't know, just a very interesting person to talk to. And then I don't usually, all the other ones are like, I whenever I guest on the show, like I happen to guest on other interview shows, obviously. So it's always like, well, I'm the show you listen to if you want to like go down like the less worthy paths of podcasts. Like I every podcast I'm on is like, you guys are so great. Like, I don't know how I'm doing this successfully at 40 episodes in, but I am. But anyway, wild tangent there, as we usually do on the show. Where did we, let's go back to, do you have, like an interest in like being a filmmaker or anything? Or is this strictly like, you just love to watch movies and you just happen to get really analytical about it?
I don't think, and there's probably people out there who would disagree with me, but I don't think you can really love movies without wanting to touch them in a way. Like, okay, eventually you've seen so many movies and you have so many things like, oh, I wish they had just, but if only, I'd never seen in a movie where they, and then like you begin to formulate like, well, in my movie, and it's not a real thing, because movies are, podcasting is you sit down, so in front of your computer, someone else sits down in front of their computer. Sometimes, if you're lucky, you're both sitting down in front of the same computer and you have a conversation, and you hit record, you hit stop. Like, filmmaking, the logistics of getting people together and getting different people's skills, and it's like, well, why are they there? It's like, are you paying them? Okay, how are you getting that money? Like, the logistics of actually making films is insane. And you can think in your head, oh, I can make a better movie, but like the actual process of directing a movie is this feat. And in the back of my head, I definitely always think like, yeah, I could make a movie. And I have, I've like written a script. My partner is an actor, so that like helps, because I live with someone who can be in front of the camera and I can be behind the camera, and that's half of it right there. So, yeah. But it's not a career goal of any sort. I mean, and it's nice. We do live in an era where I think you can be a hobbyist filmmaker. So I've made shorts in the past, so I can see myself making more.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one good thing that, I would say you're definitely more millennial than I am. That I'm right on that border of Gen X or millennial. But being in this new media age is what I've always called it, is great, because it is, and truly, I mean, you can make a movie on your phone now. Like, it's not unheard of.
Yeah.
I forget the name of the movie, but there was a Sundance movie either this year or last year that was filmed on an iPhone 5, I think.
Oh, it was Tangerine.
Yeah,
it was
Tangerine. That's the one.
Beautiful, and it was a beautiful looking movie too.
Yeah, and reading that, because me and my buddy, he's also like, he's the actor, and like I didn't realize I wanted to do something with film until I was probably about 27, 28 years old. So right around your age, that was 4 years ago for me. My son was just born, and like it's always a thing for me. Like, well, eventually I'll do it, but the kids are too young for me to really get involved with this right now. But I feel like, and it was all because of Kevin Smith, and it was more so not even him, because I would even say as of 4 years ago, he was done touting, you know what, you want to make a movie, go ahead and make a movie. He was more so touting, you want to do a podcast, make a podcast. And, I've been doing podcasts since 2007. So like, that was like, well, I've already done a podcast. Like, let me use that mentality of like, especially in new media land where I can go out and make a movie. And like we've done the same thing. We've done a bunch of shorts as well, and we have plenty of ideas for screenplays. But we just live in a wonderful world where we can use your iPhone. And I remember looking up Tangerine and like getting all the specifics of what they used to really create this movie on their phone. And it's really, as far as the camera aspect of it, it was like bare bones budget for that, which is great, for any inspiring film maker is to kind of use Tangerine. There's still a budget behind it, and I think they, from what I read, like the sound mixing and like the post production was still, they didn't like cheapen up on the movie. They still spent money.
That's the thing. People will watch movies that are shot on iPhones. People will watch movies that are shot on camcorders. The sound has to be good.
Yeah.
If the sound is bad, if people can't hear what's happening, or if there's just like a long buzz under everything, people will turn it off. That's always the actual secret of filmmaking, is that you, especially in a YouTube era when people are used to watching like low quality video, like you can make a movie with anything, but the sound has to be good.
Yeah, because not only, the sound is what makes the movie. That's something that, I've learned over the last, 4 to 10 years. I'm still probably more fan when I watch the movie, but over the last few years, I've become more like, let me analyze it as like just like a filmmaker. And it is, whether it's, the sound effects or the music always is like a key thing that helps. I forget what movie it was, but it was, they showed a scene of the movie without music. It may have been even Red State or something that Kevin Smith showed somewhere. And like, it was like, oh, this is a good scene. And then he showed the same scene again with the music underneath of it. And it just instantly transforms that scene into like greatness.
I remember I saw that at the end of an episode. Do you remember the show Wishbone?
No.
Okay, so this is a PBS show. Maybe like this, you aged out of seeing PBS shows by the time this was on the air. But it was a PBS show about like a Jack Russell Terrier that ran around with like these kids, and it read books, and then they would just put this like fucking dog in costumes, and it'd be like, all right, now it's the Red Badge of Courage, and then they would do like little special things after the episodes. And one thing I saw was like, this is how we made this thing, and it's like, here's how important music is. And it was David and Goliath, and it was like, here's Goliath exiting the tent, and it's this big boom boom boom, and he's like crawling out, and he's unfurling his giant limbs, and it's like, actually, here's that same clip without any music, and it's just a guy getting out of a tent. And I remember like being a child and being like, what is going on right now, because I'd never even considered like the importance of film music.
It would be a great little study, like to take some of your childhood favorites. Like for me, that's Back to the Future, Star Wars, and Indiana Jones. And like taking one of those movies and just stripping all the music and sound effects out of it. So it's just like the actors acting, and how different that movie would be.
You know what I heard exists? This is hearsay. But I think someone has seen this. This is like The Clown Who Cried, like the Lost Jerry Lewis movie. But like the Tim Burton, Mars Attacks. He has a print of Mars Attacks without any of the special effects on it. So it's just people running around reacting to non-existent Martians and like tennis balls on sticks. And apparently, like, he's shown it to people, and it's like one of the funniest things ever made.
Well, yeah, because that movie is, even with all the special effects. I remember, no, I haven't seen it. I've maybe watched it on DVD or VHS once, but I know I definitely went to go see it in theater because I don't know how old I was at this point, but I went to go see it with at least my dad, and I was like, hey, I want to go see this because Michael J. Fox is in it. Love Michael J. Fox, and we went to go see it, and it's. I remember liking it and it being a fun little movie, but just kind of picturing back now in my 32-year-old brain, like it's got to be a pretty campy movie. And seeing it without all that special effects, I feel like would be like an experience that's actually pretty good, pretty fun.
Especially it would just be a shot of blank space, and then it would cut to a crazy reaction shot. Because I guess they had to edit the whole movie before the special effects even started. Because that was the early days of CG. I don't think they had hammered out the way it all does. But speaking of stripping out the effects.
Oh, wait.
No. Speaking of stripping out the effects, Mars Attacks without the effects. Sorry about that.
Okay. I was like, wait, there's more. Did you cut out?
I was just giving it like a really pregnant pause.
Oh, don't worry. It will sound like that in post when I fix my stepping all over it. Mm-hmm. So with podcasting, what came first? Your love of film, and that led to podcasting. I feel like that's everyone's story. Is like, well, I really like talking about it, so I decided to do a podcast. But where did podcasting come into your life?
Well, what's interesting is you bring up new media. I always loved film, but before I was a filmmaker or a film podcaster, I was a musician, and I did DIY folk music, which is basically you go around in different people's living rooms and you put on shows, and it's just all acoustic, instruments and stuff. And I was in that.
That's fascinating.
So I was in that scene for a while in Chicago, and I met Jim Laskowski, who he runs the Now Playing Network. He's a big podcaster now. He is still on Directors Club. And so we became friends, and we would have long conversations about movies because he's also a film nut. And then he eventually said, this should be a podcast. And I said, you're crazy. No one wants to listen to us talk. Like, we're just a couple of doofuses. But we recorded a couple things, and then he came up with the concept of doing a show where each episode covered a different director. And I said, yeah, sure, whatever. And in my head, I was like, if like a dozen people who we've never heard of listen to it, that would be a real coup, and I would I would have to admit to Jim that I was wrong and that it was interesting and that we had something to say. And then, like, by the end of it, it was like 1,000 downloads an episode.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's great.
So it was definitely a thing like I kind of was reluctantly pushed into, and it turned out to be really good.
And did that lead to Tracks of the Damned?
Yeah, because I had done that for years and years, and it was like last year. I was just sort of getting burnt out on it. It's a really grueling schedule. There's no breaks. It's an episode every 2 weeks, and it kind of can cut into what you can watch just on your own time because you have to fill that space. And I would watch 6 John Huston movies, and I'd say, well, I'm not enough of a John Huston expert. I need to see this, this, and this, and it would just consume my life. So eventually, I just got burnt out, and I quit that, and I had a good 9 months where I said, I don't need a podcast, and then that itch started to come back.
Oh my God.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way when it comes to getting that itch. I mean, my longest gap was like 2 years before, I started this show up, maybe even 3 years, I forget how long. And every single month almost, I was like, God, I really just want to podcast again. And like, obviously having the kids was a big reason why I stopped. But now that they're older and whatnot, I was like, there's really no reason for me not to be doing this now. And like, I was coming up with ideas, like, but all these require a co-host that I need every single week. And like, there's no way that with me being a dad that I can get people to like join up with me every single week without being inconvenient for somebody. So like this show is perfect where I have a new co-host every single week.
Yeah, that was definitely a motivating factor for Tracks as well. As I was trying to think of something I could do alone because I didn't know, because it wasn't Jim's thing necessarily, and I didn't know anyone else who would be their thing. And also, I wanted more control, I guess, over like what the final product was. So it was definitely, a commentary track, something you could record on your own without a guest or anything. I also got tired of like talking to different guests through Skype and then having different problems every time.
Yeah.
So it was like, just look, I can sit in my living room at my convenience and record an episode of Tracks of the Damned. That was a good format for me.
Yeah, no, and that's, whereas it's hard for me. I've done plenty of podcasts where I've just, not like as like a whole show, but certain episodes where I'd sit around and talk by myself. I can easily I'm a big talker. I can easily fill, an hour conversation, just me sitting here talking to myself.
Sure.
But which is completely different than like the commentary. The nice thing about the commentary is that like, you don't have to fill the whole time, if the expectation is that the audience is going to sit there and listen to it as they watch the movie as well.
It's that is absolutely true. It's also a hard thing for me to remember because I have those podcasting instincts that dead air is dead air.
Yeah.
And so like whenever there's an 8-second stretch of movie where I don't have anything to say, I start panicking.
Well, and that's like that as a listener, and I was watching the movie too. I was like, oh my God, what's he doing? like, and not in like a bad way, but like it's as a podcaster, like I could feel that. Like, yeah, it's got to be for me. Like it would be impossible. I think it would be impossible for me to properly do a commentary track on my own, at least, because I would feel the need to talk every single second, which is not necessary. I think for your podcast,
But and also. Just you may feel that need, but what are you going to say every single second is always the problem. I did an episode on short films because I really love short films. So, and I figured it was also a good way to get other people to do podcasts or to do commentary tracks. So I asked a bunch of my friends to record their own commentary tracks for short horror films that they like, and I sort of realized like, oh, this is actually very hard. And I guess I have gotten good at it because all these people like trying their hand at doing commentaries for the first time. My friend, he chose a experimental film that's totally abstract, and it's a scary movie, but it's also very abstract. So that's Jim, my former co-host, and his commentary track, a lot of it, you could tell he was just trying to fill the air, but because it's not even a story, it's just like experimental sort of distortions and like broken images and stuff. He's like, yeah, this is really something. This is, and it's like, he doesn't have like this grand theory. It's like, oh, this represents this. This represents this. He likes it because of the just, effect of watching it. But yeah, filling that time, even if it's only like a 10-minute film, like can be really daunting.
It's and I gotta say both now I didn't listen to the Directors Club at all, but I did see that I think on the website. I think you're all linked together.
Yeah, we're all on the Now Playing network.
And but you talking about that and this podcast, it's a good like hook, which as the podcast that doesn't have a hook, it's me just sitting around talking to people. It's good. You're supposed to, as a podcast, you're supposed to have a hook. You're supposed to have something to that's different. Like I have buddies that sit around and talk about movies, and I listen to it on a regular basis, and I love it dearly and whatnot. But it is just two friends sitting around talking about a movie. There's no hook to it. Whereas like this is strictly commentary on horror film, and the Directors Club sounds like a fascinating hook to every 2 weeks you're doing one director and his catalog of work. Though I can imagine as the same reason why you left that podcast, just the amount of work, especially if you did 15 hours on Scream 1, the amount of work necessary to get an episode of the Directors Club out, it's got to be insane.
Yeah, that's a lot. It was a lot, especially the real problem was I motivate myself in that way. Like I could have been lazy and just watched 4 movies and just said what I had to say about those 4 movies. But like what would happen is I would start getting into a director and I'd get excited and then I'd be like, okay, well now I have to. So then I look up like, oh, maybe there's some articles, maybe there's an autobiography I could read. Maybe there's, it would get to be a lot of, and I guess that's what I've chosen for myself because I didn't replace that with a podcast that was less work.
And this one, is this bi-weekly as well, or is it weekly?
So this is a seasonal podcast, and this is the plan I've devised to make so I don't burn out, which is it's a weekly podcast and it's 20 episodes a season. So I start the first Friday of July and I go into November. And then I'm done until the next July. So my last episode's actually coming up. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original, is the sort of the season finale. And it works on a couple levels for me. One is, again, I work really hard at it, but I can see that end, so it doesn't feel like Sisyphus. You know, it's like I can actually say, look, you're getting burnt out on this, but you're only gonna have to do this for another 2 months. And then on the other hand, it's also like, you know, it's a podcast that requires not just more from me, but it requires more from the listener, because I do have listeners who just listen to the commentary track without watching the movie, and they're familiar enough with the movie, or they are interested enough what I have to say that they like that just fine. But in general, it's designed to be watched with a movie. And most podcasts are the opposite. Most podcasts are designed to be fit with every part of your life where you're lonely, basically. Like anytime you're grocery shopping or you're commuting or anything like that, that's sort of the space that podcasts fill. So asking someone to actually sit down and in their home and listen to a podcast and sync it up to a movie they're going to watch is a lot of work. So to say, you know, to assume that someone is going to do that every week is a lot, but to assume that someone's going to do that 20 times over the course of a year, that's reasonable. So I figure, you know, even once this season ends, there will be people who will find time and then, oh yeah, I will go back and check out the, you know, Mask of the Red Death episode or whatever. Because and God bless the people that listen to it when they're not actually watching the movie, because not that I find it difficult, because that's where I think the dead air comes into play. Oh yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, other than that, like I said, that dead air it's a nice reprieve when you're actually sitting down watching the movie, and it's you're right. I've even heard, I would say, I don't know how I'll call them commentary tracks, but we'll call them commentary tracks. Like Kevin Smith is big on running, doing a commentary on an episode of a show that he likes, or on one of his own movies. He's done commentary and as a podcast, and it's very listenable in the car. It might be because I'm just super familiar with his work or with whatever he's commentating on at that point, but it's also, even if he's by himself, he's a guy that I don't know if it's the talker in him and the podcaster or what, but he doesn't let dead air fly either.
No. Well, he is a raconteur. Like I'm pretty good at speaking, and I keep my wits about me generally, but I am not on the level of like radio personality of someone like Kevin Smith as far as just being able to fill air with my thoughts and opinions.
Yeah, and that's what this show stems from the original concept for his Fat Man on Batman show. And that's why I like to do kind of like, I do the live intro. I try to talk up someone. I always like to think that I'm doing a good job like Kevin Smith does, but I end up, he goes on for 5 minutes about somebody. I tend to go about a minute or so.
Do you ever do second takes?
No. I think one time, I did, and it was in the very, only because I didn't even get that far into it. Like, I stumbled over what the show was. Like I said, you're listening to this week's edition of Everything's Awesome, where we talk to who? And so I was like, let me start that over. And then I just started from the beginning. I don't think I would ever, in the process of my intro, just suddenly stop and say, let me do that over. Because then it's like, okay, now I'm being a little bit more scripted. And, as much of a podcaster I am, and podcasting is very much about editing at the same time, most of this, the 9.5 years I did podcasting was through this live streaming service called Stickcam. So there was no editing. I mean, I've already live broadcast a 2-hour show out to the world. Why am I going to take out the uhs or the ums, or even if there was something said that, unless it was really bad, and one of my guests said, hey, can you cut that? or in
I didn't mean to
hindsight,
say the N-word.
yeah. I mean, and I'll tell you what, the Kev of 10 years ago let that go. Like now I would drop. Now I cut like anything that's like really like I'm pro-Nazi or dropping the N-word. That I take that upon myself to cut out, even if my guest is fine with leaving it in. I'm like, yeah, but that's not this show anymore. Like,
right.
I went from the Howard Stern type of radio host to the, I would like to say the Kevin Smith type of radio host.
Sure.
Where it's less shock jockey and it's more about the conversation and passion and whatnot.
Yeah, with my intros, I always have a rough idea of what I'm going to talk about, but I don't script anything, and it's a really bad balance between, like, I should just do, I should either write what I'm going to say down, or I should do what you do and just let the intros be the intros. But I have, because I think it's kind of funny, like, I have a folder full of outtakes of me trying to do intros and then failing and then just like going, you idiot. No, that's not it. What are you talking about? And I want to release like a bonus episode that is just called The Existential Crisis Tunnel. And I just want to like put all of that like deleted footage of me berating myself, because it's, I go into a monologue at the opening of an episode, and part of it is just sort of autobiographical, where I'm just like talking about what happened to me during my day or whatever, but I find a way to dovetail that into what the episode is going to be, or if I have something very specific to say about the film I'm going to be talking about, I'll excuse me, say something about that. But I get really in my head about those intros, and I have a friend who does an interview show, and his is even more buttoned down, very NPR style, and we both like commiserate over just the wasted hours of like trying to, and the worst part is you hit record and then there's that pause and then you just see that line growing and you're like, you better say something. You have to say something. And it's always that the more you wait to say, welcome to Tracks of the Damned or whatever, you're like,
Yeah, I mean, that was certainly like, so when every now and then I'll do a pre-intro, or if it's like a part 2 conversation, I do a pre-recorded intro for the second, episode in that conversation. That is rarely scripted. Every now and then I might have something written down, and that's usually just notes, but I try to stay away from writing things down and then reading off that paper, because when I do that, I talk way faster than my mind can process. So I always have to, like, that's, if I saved those audio files, it would be, because I record on my phone and when I do the pre-intro or the post-show outro, if it's to break up an episode. And if I saved all those audio files on my phone, it would be hours, just like you said, of me stumbling. Not even funny. It just wouldn't be funny because it wouldn't be me. It wouldn't be me. I mean, I might say, God damn it. But like, it's not me belittling myself or anything. It's me just tripping over words saying, God damn it. All right, let's do it. Take 2. And so it wouldn't be as funny as what you got. I think now I also produce another podcast, and sometimes, my only involvement as an on-air personality is usually like if I want to plug one of my live shows, or if there's something that I need to inform the audience of. I kind of am that, like, the narrator of that podcast in a sense. And that is usually, again, not scripted. I'm not a big scripter because I feel like it just would be terrible. It just would be terrible. But I am off the cuff, and then if I stumble over something, then usually I can just say, take a second. You can edit this, and then I'll recut from halfway in there. So I have that. I do record intros if they're not live during the actual interview like we did here today. But other than that, it's it's all very Kevin Smithy, I think.
My favorite podcast, my favorite radio show is The Best Show with Tom Sharpling, and that used to be on the air on WFMU, and now it's a podcast form. But my favorite, like, just enthusiast kind of podcast is Idle Thumbs, their video game podcast, and they, not anymore, but during the first, I'd say, like 100 episodes, they were constantly doing weird experimental stuff and structural stuff and like editing in sound effect and musics and like reshaping the conversation so that like the chronology's all messed up, and then like a reference that's made up top you don't understand until you get to the end. And I've always been fascinated at the malleability of like radio and different things you could do. And that eventually, definitely, like once I started to do Directors Club for a while and started to feel it got be the same thing, I would do whatever I could to shake things up. Where like one episode I did, I just recorded a 4-hour conversation that, you know, about 45 minutes in the episode started, and then about 20 minutes, and then there's about 20 minutes of after time, like where like the episode of Tracks of the Day or of Directors Club happened within the episode, but it isn't.
Oh, that's cool.
And like I've done like different things with audio mixing, and again I don't really have that luxury of Tracks of the Dam because it has to actually, you know, temporarily speaking, like sync up with the movie you're watching. But I've always convinced that is what's going to happen eventually, is I will find a way to make what I'm doing weirder and different and surprise people. Do you ever feel that like you want to mess with the form and the structure, Earl, or do you just like the conversation?
So, I mean, I have what I like to do every now and then, and I don't think it really messes with the format of the show. But there are, for instance, that the one episode where I muffed the intro. Anything that's fun like that, or if something really extremely funny happens, I do like to take that clip and put it at the beginning of the episode. And so it will be the clip, and then it will be the intro, like the music, and then it will be me and the show starting. So that's the most I usually do with this show. There's other shows that I kind of do a similar thing with all the shows that I'm involved with, where I'll find, you know what, this is just really funny, and it means nothing until you're in the middle of the show.
Yeah.
I also host a podcast called Late to the Game of Thrones, and I just started watching Game of Thrones a couple weeks ago, probably about 15 weeks ago. And my buddy has been a fan of it since it's aired on TV, and he's not a fan of the books. I think he's read the Cliff Notes versions, but so you know, he said, you need to watch the show. You need to watch the show. I'll tell you what, you watch the show, we'll do a podcast about it. And, you know, generally if you're going to say, I'll do a podcast with you, I'm going to say, okay, let's do it. And, we were sitting outside at a restaurant, and this Late to the Games podcast is one where we don't record, like I'm sitting in front of my computer using a Blue Snowball, you know, it's a little bit more advanced than me on my phone. We tend to record, I download like a Voice Recorder Pro 7 on my iPhone. Takes really high audio through the iPhone microphone, and so we'll record through that. And I don't really concern myself with the quality on that. So we were sitting outside a restaurant eating lunch, having the noise go by us, you know, because we were sitting right on the road, recording the episode. And like, I'm deathly afraid of bees, deathly. And there was a bee flying around, and all of a sudden, like, we have this little conversation about the bee, but it went away. And then suddenly my friend said, oh, it's back near your arm. And I like flip out. And that whole little bee sequence, I edited it to like in between the two talks about the bee, there was some Game of Thrones talk. So I took that out and left all the bee stuff as one audio file to put it at the head of the show. So it was that little bee clip, you know, that no one would really get the context of until you listen to the rest of the episode. So I'll do that. And I have the idea to be a little bit more experimental with bonus episodes and stuff like that. Because I'm not against it. I'm 100% the guy that's like, find a way. Like, you know, we had International Podcaster Day on September 30th. And I put a challenge out there for people to start a podcast, or at least, you know, just record one podcast and see what happens with it. And then for current podcasts, just do something, you know, different that you don't normally do. And so for myself, it was to, okay, get Kevin Smith on the show. If you can't get Kevin Smith on the show, episode 37 is just going to be you talking about Kevin Smith for an hour. And it turned into, you know, obviously I didn't get Kevin Smith on the show, and I think it ended up being like a half hour, 45 minutes, of me talking about Kevin Smith, but also linking it to my personal life. Cause my uncle, is the guy who introduced me to Kevin Smith. The first Kevin Smith movie I saw was Clerks, rightfully so. I was probably I don't think I saw it in 94, but I think I saw it shortly thereafter. He showed it to me in, I think I was 12 years old, so it was probably 96 when he showed it to me. Way inappropriate age for me to be watching Clerks. But he showed me Clerks, and my uncle, at the time was, having a hard fight with cancer. So it got really emotional because it was like, it was me talking about my uncle and how he links me to so many things in my life, how I give Kevin Smith a lot of credit for being the person I am, but really it all kind of starts with my uncle. So that was like the experimental thing I did, for International Podcaster Day, because I think that episode dropped like 2 days before the 30th. But yeah, no, I'm all for like experimental things.
I think people like to be surprised. I think there's a sort of not necessarily contradiction, but there's sort of a tension between people like to listen to a podcast knowing what they're going to get. Like if totally different people are hosting it every episode, they're eventually going to go, well, I don't know what this is going to be. I don't want to listen anymore. But and people generally, they go, I like this because, and they want the things they like to still be there. But people also, I think, really like to be pleasantly surprised. On Directors Club, we did parody songs where there were two segments. There was what we watched this week, and then there was the directors, and we would do 2 parody songs every episode. And that was like a really simple thing that we did to, it builds the tension of, oh, I wonder what the songs are going to be. And then you would hear it, and then you either get what the song is when you first hear the song come in, or you don't, and you would try to figure out what's going to happen or how they're going to tie it in. But I think that was my idea too, because I had listened to a Adam Carolla Network podcast called Daves of Thunder, and they had parody songs to introduce every character. And it was this fun thing as a listener to be like, oh, when's the next parody song going to come in? To have that little surprise. And I always try to surprise the listener in some way, give the listener a pleasant surprise while not completely disrespecting what they enjoy about the show to begin with.
Yeah. No, and that's I would say that I probably we're coming up on probably by the time this airs, we've already passed the live show we're doing in November, but that's kind of like where hopefully I'm hoping 6 times a year you're going to get a random episode of me doing late night television. Basically.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, I mean that to me is the whole reason I kind of. Not the whole reason, but a dream of mine when I restarted podcasting was I want to take this to a live show. I want to do this on a stage, so to speak. And it didn't take long. It took a couple months to get to that point with the Philadelphia Podcast Fest. And it was interesting because as soon as I got accepted, I was like, oh shit, what am I going to do now? How am I going to do this show where I sit around and talk for an hour? How am I going to make this interesting for a live audience? And I was talking to my buddy who ends up being my co-host on that show for the late night version. And he's like, well, why don't you do something like late night, kind of spin it that way? And I'm like, dude, I could kiss you. That's fucking genius, man. Because back, I would say when Stickam, I don't know if you ever heard of Stickam, but that was
you said it was a streaming service.
Yeah, it was. They're shut down now. But they were they were around when Blog TV was around, and what's that? You broadcast or whatever. And it was before YouTube really did live streaming. It was at the time. It was probably the most popular live streaming service. It was the Twitch of its day. Because I would say Twitch is probably the most famous one now.
Sure.
But it was truly the Twitch of its day. And when we were doing that, we very briefly, we started it was a video broadcast. So it was live video audio broadcast. And we did maybe 1 or 2 episodes of Happy Hour Late Night, which was the name of, I did Happy Hour with Steel Tip was the name of the normal podcast. Long story short for you, Patrick, is that I used to wrestle under the name Steel Tip.
Pretty good.
I stopped wrestling because I broke my ankle and started a podcast, and I kept that personality for a while. My audience knows it. I'm sure they hate when I bring it up because, God damn it, he's going to tell the 10-hour story again.
He's going to share his old glory wrestling days.
Yeah, he's like, we've heard it enough, Kev.
All right,
please
Granddad.
Yeah, I guarantee you at least half our audience feels that way.
Did I ever tell you kids about the time with the steel chair and the revolting blob? Yes, Granddad, we know. Nothing worse than a nostalgic professional wrestler.
Oh my God, that's me. And like, the most I did was local, suburbs of Philly wrestling. So it's not like I have any claim to fame, but I still, there was people when I walked around Staples that said, "Yo, Steel Tip." And I'd be like, "Yeah, buddy."
That's great. Yeah.
I mean, that's all I ever wanted was like that kind of recognition. I was happy with it.
I was actually going to ask you, but maybe that answers my question. When you're doing the live shows and you're podcasting live and there's an audience and suddenly you're no longer just, right now it's just me and you talking, and suddenly you also have all of these people who aren't talking but watching you and are expected to be entertained. Is that a lot of pressure for you, or
my God. Yes. So I'll tell you. So I did a live show back in 2006 or 2007 or whatever. Like the first podcast I ever did, we did a live show pretty quickly, but that was no pressure. It was me. It was like 4 other guys that were like kind of round tabling it. And then we also were more of an MC for a music event. No pressure there. It took 9 years from there to do a next live show at the Philadelphia Podcast Fest. And one of the main reasons I brought on someone to play the Ed McMahon role was because I didn't want to be on stage by myself. And the amount of pressure that I felt, not necessarily leading up to it, but the day of, was insane. And I still feel like I failed because the first 20 minutes was me trying to do late night monologuing, and I'm not that funny, it turns out. Like,
yeah.
But as soon as
at
I
that
sat
point,
down,
you've just decided to do stand up.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and it went on way too long, and like we did trivia as well. So like it wasn't just me monologuing. Like we also did a trivia, but like we'll say if point A of the start to point B of me sitting down to talk to somebody, it took 20 minutes to get to that point. And it was far too long. But once I sat down and started talking to my first guest, that's where I shine. Like I can sit down, I can hold a conversation, I can be funny naturally in just a natural conversation. And we just had fun with it. And, I didn't suck enough to where they didn't like, the guy who was running sound, he's like, I want to start doing podcasts. He owns a music store in my music store. So can you come do a show in September? And I was like, well, I can't do September or October, but I can do November. And
That's nice.
He said, sold. So we were invited back into the city of Philadelphia onto South Street to do another live show that hopefully is going to go over swell. And in fact, because this is being aired after we did that show, it 100% went off without a hitch.
Oh yeah.
But we actually ended up
Unless
going up to New
Philadelphia
York.
doesn't exist anymore, then people are going to be really confused. Like, what are you talking about? Godzilla rose from the sea and stomped it out of the ground.
In 2216, in 200 years, when this episode airs, they're going to say Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Where is that in the Republic of Trump?
Yeah, alien historians will be very confused by the timestamp of this.
Yes. But we also went up to New York and did a live show right around the weekend of New York Comic Con. And that one, there was some pressure leading up to it, but then because it was a colossal train wreck, like there was no sound guy. So we literally had to play our theme song through a phone into the microphone. Like I walked out onto this, I do like a very, sticking to my wrestling days, I do an intro. Like I come out. Like,
sure.
I come out to music. The Philadelphia live show, it was a modified version of our theme song for this show with like a late night feel to it with my co-host announcing the guests and whatnot. For the first one, I thought it was appropriate to come out to Everything Is Awesome from the Lego movie.
Sure.
And so I come out and do like a wrestling intro. I take selfies with the crowd and whatnot and do my thing. In New York, it was because we were going in Hell's Kitchen, I decided to use the song Bring Me to Life, which is from the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie. And it was, because I heard it through a microphone, I just came out like walking like Charlie Brown, and there instantly was no pressure because it was like, well, this is going to be the show, guys. Like it's going to be a train wreck.
Yeah.
And we, I still haven't listened to that. I still haven't edited it. I still haven't released it. I think the New York show is going to be released sometime in either the end of November or the beginning of December, because it needs a lot of editing. It just was not. It was just a train wreck. So I'm glad to be doing it in Philly again with professional sound people. We just finalized our guests. Well, I shouldn't say that we did, but I'm going to assume that we did. We had Jeff Stormer from the Party of One podcast on, and we had Nicholas Reed from the Danger Club band on as our musical guest, and it was a grand old time, I'm sure. But yeah, it's a lot of fun doing. Like I even think that like a show like yours is something that would work in a live format. Like
I have seen there was a series that went on for a while. Do you know the group Everything Is Terrible?
I should, but I don't.
Okay, so Everything Is Terrible. Basically, they find like crazy things from like public television or old VHS tapes or whatever, and they make videos and they put them on YouTube, and they've made like movies that are just like 80-minute compilations of just like crazy shit, like from Christian scare videos or like televangelists and stuff like that. So they're based in Chicago, so they sometimes do some events here, and they had a series for a while where you would go to this club and they had, seating, and they would project a Lifetime original movie, and then they would have 4 comedians doing like a sort of MST3K over it.
That's genius.
And it was pretty fun. And there were really good comedians there, so that was fun. But as far as like doing it for a crowd, I don't like the logistics of that seem crazy to me.
I mean, it's I don't know. It's something that, I mean, there you go. That's like your next year's podcasting day challenge. Like,
yeah, I guess so.
In 2017, try to do a live show. Like, does Chicago have a podcast fest or anything?
It does. It has a podcast fest. I'm not familiar with it. I've never been involved in any sort of podcast convention or festival or anything like that.
Well, see, the nice thing about the Philadelphia one, it's very indie first. It's very indie friendly. It's not like it's free to come in and join and watch and whatnot. It literally is. There's 2 main venues usually, and then sometimes there's random venues throughout the city. But it's just really low key. It's not like LA's Podcast Fest, which I'm not sure if that's free to go to or not. But it's not even like New York's Comic Con, or New York. Definitely not like New York Comic Con, but it's definitely not like New York's Podcast Fest, because that I think is actually in. I think that I don't know if they have one in the city itself. I think it's like outside of the city in Jersey somewhere. And it's same deal. It's not necessarily, it's like big time. It's like all the big names in podcasting. So the thing I love about the Philadelphia one is, and I would say we have some big names. Like there's Sex with Tamara, who I've heard of that podcast for years. The Overdue podcast, which is a podcast on Jake and Amir's podcast network, Headgum. They're based out of Philly, so they do their podcast there. So there are big names, but I guess they're more so big indie names, and then there's the rest of us little Joes that do it. But even like to perform in front of 20 people, I think we had, I think the audience that we did was like 20 to 30 people. That's cool. Like that was just a fun experience. And I think that, I don't know. I always find a way. Like, how can I do every podcast I do in front of a crowd? And it would be interesting to see your show like in front of a crowd. Obviously, that's the thing with Everything Is Awesome. We had to modify our show to be a live audience friendly. Tracks of the Damned, I'm sure, is the same way. You have to modify it to be live audience friendly.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've definitely got me thinking down this course now. It was a thing I had dismissed, but now I'm like, but I do know a guy who owns a bed sheet and a projector.
Hey, and I'll tell you what, if you come to Philly like in August of 2017, their goal is just to have more and more podcasts every year. I don't think they necessarily have to be from Philly. So if you come to Philly, I could probably hook you up with a podcast fest.
That'd be dope. Yeah, for sure.
And I'll tell you, before we wrap up here, through the dealing with my uncle over the last couple months and whatnot, I've been listening to certain podcasts to like kind of help me get through it. And Chicago is just got some of the best podcasts out there. I'm going to give a shout out to the Campaign podcast, part of the One Shot Podcast Network, which I think is all based out in Chicago there. And I think it helps that they're all comedians and whatnot, which I feel like out of everything I've listened to that, podcasts with comedians on it, I feel like Chicago has so far been like in first place with everything. Like you guys have some really funny people out there.
Chicago is a good mix of, it's like a public radio town. WBZ is out here. So this is where like This American Life and Wait, Don't Tell Me and a lot of similar shows, like they all come out of here. It's a huge improv and sketch comedy town. There's so many improv and sketch comedy theaters, and it is a big stand-up town as well. So like it's a good environment for that kind of podcast for sure.
And the Campaign podcast is a Star Wars, whatever. It's not D&D, but whatever the Star Wars version of D&D is, Dungeons and Dragons. It's a role playing game for Star Wars, and like that. I started watching Star Wars because of my uncle. He, the first time I ever watched New Hope was with him, and just because they are. I don't know if you listen to these role-playing podcasts. I think they're some of the funniest things out there because they're telling a story as well.
The D&D podcast that Penny Arcade did back in the day, I was really into those, yeah. And I've listened to a couple more since, but not like regularly.
I'll tell you, just because you're from Chicago, I'm not saying they're my favorite D&D podcast, because I know people that do D&D podcasts. There's like 4 or 5 of them that I listen to, and I think they're all great in their own special way. The Campaign holds a special place in my heart because it is Star Wars. And the people involved are like, I think 2 or 3 of them are like improv guys, and they're just always in character. It's rare that they're not actually in character during that podcast. So it's just so funny. And if I would say, Pat, if you want to get into another one, Campaign's the one to go with. It is so funny.
I'll have to check that out.
So let's where can people find you on the internets?
So I'm part of the Now Playing Network, so that's at nowplayingnetwork.net. I'm on iTunes, Tracks of the Damned. I'm at Twitter at Damn Tracks. I have a Facebook page, Tracks of the Damned. I'm not on Tumblr yet. I have not cracked that environment, but as soon as I figure out how to make a GIF, I'm sure I'll be on there as well. Generally speaking, hold on, I think it's, nowplayingnetwork.net/Tracks of the Damned is where you can find my podcast.
I'll tell you what, Tumblr is a thing that I did for a while, but I don't I say this a lot on the show, though normally it's about Snapchat. I'm at that age now where things start to scare me. I'm an IT guy, so I try to stay hip with the technology.
Sure.
But like when it comes to social media, like I just started embracing Instagram, and I don't even think I'm embracing that fully.
No.
But like Snapchat scares me. Like someone told me to download it. I think I downloaded it a few years ago. I tried using it. I couldn't figure it out, and I said I'm just gonna delete this. Like I'll stick with my Twitter. Like Twitter's I prefer Twitter all the way.
Well, I mean, I think that is what makes those things appealing to the young people, is that they have the time and their brains are still soft. We're old men who have hardened brains, and learning new things is hard. But like young people, they see Snapchat and they just see like new opportunities and new venues for humor. So I mean, that's what made Vine so great, is making a good Vine is really, really hard. And so the people who got good at it built up that very specific technical expertise as well as a sensibility, and it became its own, like a Vine isn't really the same as sketch comedy. A Vine is its own sort of brand of humor. I think that's what makes those things great, is that old guys like us are kept out.
Yeah, I mean, I guess keep me out of everything but I guess Twitter's where I'm going to go and die.
Sure, yeah.
That's all I really know. But you can find me on Twitter at ThatNerdyKev. You can find this show on Twitter at RealAwesomePod. But most importantly, you can find this show on AwesomePodcast.com. While you're on iTunes subscribing to Tracks of the Damned, make sure you leave a 5-star review for that podcast. It helps get more eyes and ears on his show. And while you're there, of course, I'm going to be a little selfish. Make sure you search for Everything is Awesome. Subscribe, leave a 5-star review. and a rating and whatnot. iTunes Math does wonders for shows like us. A couple indie guys that are doing podcasts. We need all the help we can get. Do it.
It's true.
And for Everything Is Awesome, I'm Kev. Thanks again for being on the show, Patrick. It was a pleasure talking to you. I feel like we didn't really get into much of anything except for Scream and a little bit of podcasting. So I feel like we'll have to have you on again at some point, maybe next Halloween for your season 2.
I'd love to. Yeah.
Yeah. So For Everything Is Awesome, we'll see you next time right here on awesomepodcast.com.